There was a village, perhaps still is, tucked quietly between hills that curved like sleeping animals, where the air smelled of moss and baked things, and the wind arrived only when it had nothing else to do. The village didn't have a name anymore. Or maybe it did, but only the trees remembered. Carl had not been born there. He had arrived one afternoon when the light was the color of apricots and the shadows stretched long, like arms resting after work. No one knew exactly from where he came, but a very old woman had opened her door and said only, "Come in, child," and Carl had gone in. The house was small, with uneven stone floors and windows that didn't quite close. But it smelled like thyme and wood smoke, and her hands moved through the air as if folding something invisible and precious. She didn't ask Carl to explain. She fed him soup and gave him a blanket that had clearly covered many dreams before his. She didn't speak often, and when she did, it was never with questions, only with quiet certainties like, "It will snow soon," or "The water sings louder when you're listening." Carl stayed. The villagers never questioned it. In a place where time curled in on itself like a cat, strangers were simply stories that hadn't yet unfolded. The old woman passed away one winter morning, her breath light as a feather leaving her lips. Carl didn't cry, but something in him bent gently inward, like a tree remembering the wind. And from then on, he lived in the same house, kept the fire going, swept the floor with her old broom, and sat outside in the evenings, just as she had. He had no role, no title, no task. Yet people noticed his presence the way they noticed the smell of bread baking in a nearby house, not loudly, but with comfort. He walked slowly, often along the path by the stream. He paused to feel the warmth of stones, or to listen to how the leaves spoke when no one interrupted them. He didn't seek to be useful, but he was. Not in doing, but in being. One girl, bright-eyed and full of inner storms, once sat beside him on a low stone wall. "I feel like I'm never enough," she confessed. "I keep trying every day, and still..." Carl didn't rush to speak. He let the space between her words settle. "Maybe," he said after a while, "you're not meant to be more. Maybe you're meant to be here." She didn't quite understand, but something unclenched in her chest. A young boy once ran to him in tears, his wooden toy broken. Carl didn't fix it. Instead, he looked at it, then at the boy. "It's sad when things break," he said, "but sometimes they become quieter. and in the quiet you hear things you couldn't before. The boy blinked. He didn't smile, but he held the broken toy a little differently when he walked away. Carl spoke rarely, but when he did, it was like hearing the wind through tall grass, soft and never quite captured. Children liked to be near him, not because he played with them, but because they didn't have to pretend around him. They could be wild or silent, covered in mud or wrapped in questions, and he never corrected them. He simply noticed. And being truly noticed without judgment or expectation was a magic that even grown-ups forgot existed. People often assumed Carl must be lonely. After all, he lived alone, didn't speak much, and never asked for company. But Carl was not alone. He was with the fire, the wind, the shifting light. He was with the memory of the old woman who had once said, "Come in," as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He didn't chase connection, but it found him. Sometimes, in the evening, someone would sit near him without speaking. They might stay a minute or an hour. When they left, they often looked less tangled. Carl never noticed how much he gave. He once said to a man who was pacing with frustration, "Even the moon doesn't try to shine. It only reflects what's already there." He once told a grandmother who was afraid of fading away, "You don't have to be remembered loudly to be part of things." Time passed, or perhaps stood still, in the village. The trees grew, and the seasons folded over one another like soft linen. Carl remained, a presence, not a role. He did not teach, but people learned around him. He did not lead, but others followed the rhythm of his quiet. He did not demand, and so nothing resisted him. And when the wind blew, sometimes gently, sometimes wildly, it always paused, just for a moment, when it passed by Carl, as if recognizing something in him, something that asked nothing and gave everything. And the moral is, you don't have to prove your worth to be welcome in the world. Some of the deepest offerings are made in silence by those who ask for nothing and whose presence alone is a kind of home.